Hello and welcome back to the Single Malt Frontier, where we explore the edge of innovation in American single malt whiskey. Here on the show, we do a little bit of tasting and a lot of talking. Usually we talk about whiskey, but the best thing about whiskey is the conversations that we get to have along the way, and we get to talking about a little bit of everything. I'm your host, Doug, or as I'm known around the internet, Demi Tastes. I'm joined today, as usual, by my co-host, Phil. And our guest today is Jim Hough of Liberty Pole Spirits. Now, if you know Liberty Pole at all, you probably know them as the brand that makes the peated rye and the peated bourbon, which I know, at least in our circles, we love talking about that all the time because peat comes up and inevitably the bourbon bros go, hey, why don't they make peated bourbon? And we go, actually, they do. There's a couple of brands out there that do it, and Liberty Pole is one of them. So we're happy to finally have an excuse to speak with Liberty Pole because we love peat around here as malt heads, as peat heads. It's always good to talk about peat. But the really cool thing for us today, and the reason that we're having this conversation, is because Liberty Pole is just about to release a limited run American single malt whiskey, hopefully the first of several such releases. And we have a sample of it that we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, Jim, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do?
Thank you, Doug. Thanks, Phil, for having me on. I'm Jim Hough. My wife and my two adult sons started our distillery, coming up on 9 years ago now. So we've been around for a minute or two. We started life as a 100% whiskey only distillery. And we've remained true to that. That was kind of one of our startup goals, and kind of our ethos was that we really wanted to focus on whiskey, and kind of as putting the business plan together. Anytime we took still time away from making whiskey, would be a week that we weren't learning how to make better whiskey. So we've remained true to the fact that we are a whiskey only distillery. Grain to glass, we're a pot still distillery. We love pot still whiskeys, but we've been around for almost 9 years. Family owned. We are located in Washington, Pennsylvania, which is about 45 minutes due south of Pittsburgh. We happen to be kind of in the epicenter of what was known as the Whiskey Rebellion, back in the early days of this country. In 1791, Alexander Hamilton, and by the way, we have a portrait of Alexander Hamilton hanging unceremoniously upside down in our tasting room. But in 1791, Alexander Hamilton brought into law the first domestic excise tax, and it was on distilled spirits. Came to be known as the whiskey tax, because the country had started moving away from rum, and into distilled grain whiskey. So, in Western Pennsylvania, we were basically the frontier in 1791. That was about as far west as anybody had really moved, in civilization terms. And these settlers here in Western Pennsylvania were primarily Scots-Irish, and they had an ingrained, a deep knowledge of distillation that they brought with them from their homeland. And a lot of them left their homeland to escape the crown, the English crown's taxation without representation. They came here. Most of them were Revolutionary War veterans. They fought for independence in the Revolutionary War. They were carving out a really, really rocky, rough living on the frontier. And one of their only luxuries was the whiskey they made. And they weren't making whiskey as a business enterprise. They weren't selling it. Basically, it was a means of preserving their grains. What Western Pennsylvania is not the most fertile farmland in the country. One of the grains that really did well here in Western Pennsylvania was rye. And so, that's why Pennsylvania to this day still has a reputation as a rye whiskey state. So, what little rye that they could grow, what they weren't able to consume as food, what they weren't able to trade, what was left over would go bad. It would mold. The mice would get it. But if you turn that into whiskey, it lasts forever. So they were able to preserve their grains. It was easier to transport. It was easier to trade. So they really did not take kindly to Alexander Hamilton's tax on their distillation practices. So they revolted. They tarred and feathered tax collectors. They set fire to the local tax collector's house. It got to the point where George Washington assembled 13,000 troops to march to Washington to put this crazy group of whiskey rebels down, and that was kind of the end of the whiskey rebellion. But it remains a very kind of a very unknown part of American history, but kind of a really important moment in time in our country's history. So, that was all about whiskey, and being located where we are in the heart of the Monongahela Valley, we're all about whiskey too. So,
Thanks for that historical background. I really appreciate that. I know that Phil also likes to talk about whiskey history, and especially one of his favorite topics. I mean, Phil, despite him being a good sport about the fact that this podcast quickly turned into just American single malt, Phil is a big fan of rye whiskey. And one of his favorite things to mention is that, hey, Pennsylvania rye was actually the original most popular whiskey in the United States. And so I know he's having a geek fest right now. And now's a great time for Phil to test if his audio is still working. And that's
hello.
a maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't hear anything.
Sorry, I lost audio again for just a second.
Okay, we have your voice.
Excellent. Sorry, what was the question?
Oh no, I was giving you an opportunity to speak about Pennsylvania rye if you want to.
Oh, so I live in one of the other areas that is well known for its rye whiskey. And so, sort of, for the longest time, the two biggest, like, competing types of whiskey were the Monongahela, Pennsylvania rye, and what has come to be known as Mount Vernon or Maryland style rye, despite the fact that it's mostly made in Virginia. Um, and it is one of the coolest bits of distilling history that a lot of people don't know is that there was a period of time where everybody was shut down, and pretty much the only distilleries that survived, talking now about prohibition, were distilleries that had connections to legislators who could help them get permits to distill medicinal spirit. And a lot of places that have such a rich history in distilling, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, lost a lot of their market share to what became America's spirit, bourbon, in Kentucky and, strangely, Indiana. And so a lot of the brands that people think of when you think of rye whiskey are from Pennsylvania. Um, and what has sort of developed into the more popular styles of rye are really different from the Pennsylvania style because of the difference in grain availability. And it is really cool to be able to try a rye from Pennsylvania that is a more traditional Monongahela style rye, despite some of the biggest brands taking names from Pennsylvania to distill in Kentucky.
Yeah, no, good point. The Beams, the ancestors were from Pennsylvania before they moved to Kentucky. You had mentioned the medicinal permits, and old Overholt is an example of a brand that had a relationship to the Mellon family. Mellon was I think the Secretary of the Treasury at the time Prohibition was enacted. So they were able to get some medicinal distillation permits but yeah,
So
I mean, there's a lot of even among Pennsylvania distillers, there's a lot of kind of, I don't want to say disagreements, but to come up with a core definition of Pennsylvania rye, or even more specifically Monongahela rye, is really hard to do, to kind of satisfy all the different types of rye distillation we have going on in the Commonwealth right now. You know, before I really got deeply into rye, my understanding of what Pennsylvania rye was high. It was a high rye mash bill with no corn. Pretty simple, right? You've always heard that Maryland rye contained, a little bit of corn. It was somewhat sweeter. Pennsylvania ryes were heavier on the rye, no corn. They tended to be a little bit more herbal, a little bit more spicy. Kentucky ryes were kind of, basically almost a boo rye, right? A lot of the Kentucky ryes are, bare minimum 51% corn, with rye is, I'm sorry, 51% rye with corn as that secondary grain. But when we really started working with the Pennsylvania Distillers Guild, and we started talking to other rye distillers in the state, you realize there's a lot of different techniques going on, and we're all making Pennsylvania rye. We happen to be in the Monongahela Valley, so we felt it was really important to kind of use that name to bring back the notion of Monongahela rye. You know, our rye, our Monongahela rye has a mash bill of 74% rye, so it's a high rye. We have 13% wheat in our mash bill. We like wheat. Wheat produces a little softer, a little bit more approachable spirit. So we add some wheat, and the rest of it is malted barley. What we think is important, besides being in the Monongahela Valley, that harkens back to true Monongahela rye, was, we are a true sweet mash distillery. Everything we do is sweet mash. We're double pot distilling. We have a low barrel entry proof. So those kind of things, we think really help dial us into, a true representation of kind of pre-prohibition Monongahela rye. Actually, more colonial. If you talk to, once the three chamber still was introduced in the 19th century, a lot of the industrial producers in Western Pennsylvania were using a three chamber still. Because we're more of a brand that celebrates the whiskey rebellion. We're more of a colonial style, which, three chamber stills had not been invented in the 18th century. It was all pot distillation. So that's kind of our interpretation of the rye that we're making.
All right, before we go too much deeper into this conversation, first I just want to do a little bit of roll call. So we've got Spencer Mav in the comments. Thanks for joining the chat. Carrie Daniels saying hi as well. Good to see you. We had some people over on Instagram as well who may have popped over. Oh, yep. We have Des Bourbons is over on Instagram. Welcome. Good to see you. I can't show comments from Instagram. So if you do want me to read your comment on air, or at least I can read your comment, but if you want me to show your comment on air, pop over to YouTube. You can drop that in the comments. And everybody else who's in the YouTube comments, say hi to each other. Let everybody know what you're drinking. Make some friends here, because we aim to be entertaining. Whether we succeed or not is up to you. So I want to harken back first. I want to get something in the glass. I don't know about you guys. I feel like Phil may have either just poured the American Single Malt or poured the rye.
The rye, the standard rye. I figured that's
standard rye
place to start.
Excellent place to start.
What closest you have is the full proof.
Yes, so I'll hold off on that for just a minute, because a fun thing happened when I was going to buy my bottles of Liberty Pole. I have the bourbon cream. Bourbon cream is not something I usually buy. In fact, this is my first bourbon cream. I usually buy, Irish cream. Bailey's are a generic brand alternative. So I've been curious to try bourbon cream, and the opportunity presented itself because when I put the two ryes that I bought in my cart, I realized that the $20 shipping that I would save by adding a third bottle to my cart basically made this bottle about $15. So I said, hey, I can't pass that up. Now's my chance to try some bourbon cream. So to harken back to a bit that we used to do, in my coffee today is a little bit of the Liberty Pole bourbon cream, and it is quite tasty. So I can recommend that for sure. But not to dwell too much on the bourbon cream. Phil, I don't have that rye, but if you want to talk a little bit of tasting notes on that rye, feel free.
I haven't had a chance to pour any. Last night I got really excited that I received the box in time. So last night I poured myself some of the peated rye. And I haven't actually, this is my first time trying the standard release. I really like it. It is a lot earthier and more herbal than a lot of the popular ryes on the market. It doesn't have the almost toothpaste mint note that you get in a lot of the MGP 95.5.
Yep.
I completely agree with that on the Monongahela.
So just to kind of tie those two ryes together, they are the same mash bill. They're both that are Monongahela mash bill, so 74-13-13. The only difference between the two of those is proof. The straight rye fill that you have is 92 proof. Our full proof, and the reason we call it full proof is, our barrel entry proof is 108. And so, typically over 4 years in a barrel, the proof is going to kick up a few points. And so, we wanted to, there's a couple reasons why we picked 108. We picked 108 as a barrel entry proof for a lot of specific reasons. But as far as the bottling proof for this, it was laziness on our part, because we knew that whatever batch we're blending, however many barrels we're going to put into a blend, the combined proof on those would be above 108. It would be 111, 112. So we wanted to print labels so that we didn't have to hand write, 109.6 proof on batch one, and we just don't have the automated equipment to make that labeling easy. So we said, okay, we're just going to proof this down a little bit, add just a tiny amount of water, get it back to barrel entry proof of 108, and that was the decision point. But that's really the only difference between the two ryes you guys are drinking. And obviously when you are drinking the 108, the full proof, it is a much more kind of a concentrated rye, right? We didn't have to, we didn't add a lot of water to that. It didn't get diluted down. You're getting a lot of those kind of almost cast strength barrel flavors.
Sorry, the dog is underfoot. I apologize for dancing around in my chair a little bit. So that's I don't know if we've ever talked about foolproof on this podcast before. It doesn't really come up in the context of American single malt. My understanding of foolproof is that it typically does have that definition, that it's taking it back to barrel entry proof. Even though there's no legal definition for foolproof, it seems that pretty much anyone who does a foolproof does it that way. Yeah,
that was kind of what we saw when we researched it a little bit. Again, you're right, Doug. It is kind of it's not defined. It's a, I don't want to say it's a marketing term, but it's like small batch, right? There is no definition for small batch. Our small batch is quite a bit different than Jim Beam small batch, right? So.
Let's see. I could give so as you said, the full proof and the standard rye that Phil has, it is the same mash bill. It's all effectively Monongahela rye style.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So we're effectively tasting the same thing, just at a different strength. I could take mine down a bit, and then
yeah, I was gonna say you could put a little water in another glass, and you would be tasting what Phil has.
You know, I might do that.
would
but
say
but
this,
I like, Phil, you nailed it. In terms of kind of your initial tasting notes on it. I mean, it is earthy and it is herbal. I wouldn't say that our rye is, you hear a lot of people talk about spiciness. I think it has a nice long finish, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a spicy rye. It's definitely more herbal, more more earthy, more oily and viscous, and that's kind of our love of pot stills, that it allows us to produce a whiskey like that.
and at 46%, a lot of whiskeys lose a lot of uh, body and sort of just generally volume, and this is a very nice fullness to it at 46%.
Yeah, you said 46, and I had to go re-estimate how much water I had added, so I added a little bit more whiskey. Okay, I like it proofed down. I mean, I liked it at full proof also. I mean, like I'm not much of a rye drinker. I'll be perfectly upfront with you. I
Mhm.
don't really know how to read a rye. I really liked Phil's tasting notes on this one, and I'm like, I can't do better than that. So I decided to let him
Yeah.
take the lead on the rye tasting notes. But yeah, this is up there. This is the style of rye that I like. In my first encounters with rye were MGP 95.5 over and over again. It was Bullet. It was Widow Jane, a few other brands as well. And it was just like, I keep getting the same flavor. Rye tastes the same to me. And I didn't know that everyone was sourcing from MGP at that time. So I kind of just stopped drinking rye. And then I tried the Wild Turkey 101 rye, which is 51% rye, that's sort of the bare minimum, and sort of said, well, that basically just tastes like bourbon and it's more expensive. So why? Um, and then I just kind of stopped drinking rye for a really long time. And then
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
few expressions like Wilderness Trail rye, for example, really sort of brought me back. And I realized that rye has something to offer besides that mintiness or besides like just basically bourbon, that there's more here. I really like how herbal this one is. Like it's actually surprisingly dry. And today it's hitting me a little sweeter than it was yesterday. Yesterday I had some spicy food for dinner, which has a tendency to cut sweetness and things. So I was only getting those herbal notes, which was kind of unusual. Um, but yeah, I'm a fan of this for sure. Definitely, I'm happy I bought two bottles. One of them's peated, but you know that's another story. But I'm happy that I have
Yeah.
the two.
Well, Doug, you have the same rye journey that we see almost every day in the tasting room. We do tastings in the bottle shop, and you'll get to the rye and people will say, oh, I'm not a rye fan. And so I'll ask them what ryes they've had, what they didn't like about them, and inevitably they'll name three or four ryes that I know are all MGP, MGP sourced, and that they didn't understand that, and they kind of think that flavor profile is what defines rye. And so I can usually talk them into trying ours because it is significantly different than a lot of those 95.5s that are out there, which was our goal, right? I mean, MGP can make a lot more whiskey than us. They can make it a lot more inexpensively. So why would we try to make the same whiskey that they're making? That that's why we do what we do. And uh, yeah.
So I just wanted to make another note about just sort of the label here. I
Yes.
love. I mean, first of all, the screen printing direct on the bottle is a classy move. I think that really elevates the look of a bottle. So, the fact that that ink is right there instead of it being a transparent sticker. Um,
Right.
I mean, like the label isn't the flavor of the whiskey, but a lot of people buy on the basis of labels. So I like to call out when I can. This is an attractive bottle, right? It's got a pretty standard shape, but the label is just really good looking, and it's got that sort of wax seal look to it. Also, it's got pot distilled, sweet mash, and the mash bill all directly written out. The mash bill is not a secret here, which is good to see. Um,
Right.
you see that a lot. We like transparency. Mash bill being a secret seems a bit silly because you can make all the different whiskeys in the world you want just with a 100% malt mash bill. So why keep it a secret if you're, doing anything else? Because it's just more variety. The chances that somebody could copy you are so slim.
Yep, 100%.
It's not going to come through on the camera, but the map to the distillery on the
Yeah.
inside of the back label
Yes.
is
Yeah.
so great. I really like that.
Yeah,
Yes, that's another thing for sure.
that is a map of Western Pennsylvania during that whiskey rebellion era, 1791 to 1794. As the liquid gets drained out of the bottle, a lot of those names become a little bit easier to read, but you can see the names of the different settlements. And then at the very bottom is a GPS coordinate that actually is right where our still is sitting. We took a GPS reading right where the still is. So
Oh yeah, I see it in the bottom left corner.
yeah, yep, yep.
Nice. And Spencer asked the last question of transparency is what's the age on the rye? It says 3.5 years old on my bottle.
Yeah, so this latest batch is a 6 barrel blend. And I think we had 2 barrels that were less than 4 years. 3 years, 6 months, 3 years, 9 months, and then the other 4 barrels were over 4 years. We're kind of at that awkward teenage year in terms of, kind of hitting that 4 year mark. We do everything now and have been doing everything in 53-gallon barrels since 2019. So most of our blends, most of our single barrels, we're really kind of focusing on 4+ years old, and we're putting away about 60% more whiskey annually than we're using, and that's kind of how we're able to extend those age ranges. Our age statements keep getting older year by year. So yeah, so there's we don't touch a barrel that's under 3.5 years old these days. Ideally, we're looking for 4 to 5 years old.
So is that 3.5 just the old label consistency? Like it's for sure older than that, or is this batch actually?
Yeah, because we wanted to give ourselves the freedom that if we find a 3.5-year-old barrel that really adds to the blend, really brings something to that blend that makes it pop, we didn't want to have to exclude it because the label says 4 years. So that's kind of a baseline for us, and once we're sure we don't need any 3.5-year-old barrels, we'll either go non-age stated or put 4 years on there. We haven't decided yet what we want to do.
Okay.
On
So, go ahead.
on the subject of age, because I feel like this is a good transition point. You said on Twitter that your upcoming American Single Malt release is the oldest whiskey you are going to be or that you have released.
Right.
And it says on the sample 7.5 years.
Yes.
So my kind of strange question is, your distillation point on that lines up roughly with the beginning of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission Foundation.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, we were actually one of the original group of distilleries that were part of the American Single Malt Commission. Once we kind of realized that we did not have the proper equipment to be a big player in American Single Malt, we kind of backed away a little bit and focused on our rye and bourbon lines. But single malts, I love single malt. We're equal opportunity whiskey fans, and so we definitely want to have single malt as part of our portfolio. It's just something that we have to kind of work with partners in order to make that happen going forward, because we just don't have the ability right now to do it the way we want to do it.
And see, that sort of brings to my mind, conversations that I have had with distilleries that don't produce a rye whiskey say, oh, rye is difficult to work with. We don't have the capability of working with rye. Um, and so I've always, had this conception in the back of my mind that rye whiskey is one of the more difficult whiskeys to make. But you make rye whiskey, and barley is harder for you to handle than or distill on the grain than rye is.
So the
Hmm.
distillate, the cooking, people have issues with rye because it's a gummy grain. It's very difficult. It foams. It's gummy. It's really messy to work with. Um, we've got that down. We use some enzymes to kind of keep the rye easier to work with. Our issue with barley, it's not the grain itself. It's just, after the cook, barley, um, barley has a very tannic husk. So when you operate like we do, where we mash and then we ferment. We do a long ferment. We do a 6-day ferment. So when you mash, a single malt, and then you do a 6-day ferment with the grain still part of that process, and then you do a stripping run with again the grain still, that the tannins, the bitterness from those barley husk really have an opportunity to kind of take over your distillate. And there are single malt distillers. I've talked to them that regularly do on grain single malts, but I don't think I'm off base saying the majority of American single malts are lautered after mashing before fermentation,
Mhm.
and that takes that barley out of the mix, and so you're not sitting on those tannic husks for 72 hours, 6 days in our case. And so, it doesn't let that bitterness, kind of when you think of a single malt, you think of kind of a lighter, just a really, I don't want to, refreshing, light, mild whiskey maybe. But when in our case, it just, we don't have the ability to separate those grains, and it's not the barley itself, it's our equipment really doesn't make that easy for us. But
So
when we
I was
work
going to
with
ask about the lauter. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Doug.
So I was going to ask about the lautering. Is it just that you wouldn't lauter your other grains, and so adding a lauter ton just to
Right.
support American single malt doesn't make sense? Okay.
Doesn't make sense. Yeah, it doesn't make sense because we're in Pennsylvania, so our bread and butter, our flagship will always be a rye whiskey. We love rye. We love where we're located. We love the history. So as much as we want to play in the single malt space, um, right now we just can't justify the expense of bringing in a lauter ton for something that might be, 2 weeks of production a year, based on our schedule.
Okay. So I before we move on to talking about peat and all of the implications of that, um, which actually that's an interesting question. Should we have the single malt before or after the peat? So the single malt is cherry wood smoked, and we've got a peat smoked rye. Which one do you think would override the flavor of the other?
I would do the peat last. I would do the peated
Okay.
rye last.
Okay.
Yeah, because the cherry wood. The one thing that we've noticed, and I'm sure you guys being peat fans, we've noticed that the older a whiskey is, the more time it spends in a barrel, the more the peat kind of fades away. I don't. So
Yeah.
a young peated whiskey has a lot more peat pop to it than a 20-year-old, and so with the single malt being almost 8 years old, I think that cherry wood influence has kind of dissipated a little bit, where the peat is still really going to pop in the peated rye.
Yeah, that's been our observation as well. We almost say it as a fact at this point, and I wonder if we should check that fact. But peat smoke, for whatever reason, the older a whiskey is within the same brand, right? As the whiskey gets older, the smoke
Oh yeah.
decreases,
Yeah.
right? You can have older whiskeys that are smokier if they came from a different brand or a different smoking process or whatever. But if we're talking the same whiskey aged longer, gets less smoky and more earthy, or there's other flavors that kind of more estery. There's other flavors that come out from that peat.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I'm sorry, did I miss did you say that cherry wood smoke doesn't quite seem to do the same thing?
No, I think it does. And
Okay.
that's why I'm recommending, the single malt first, because I don't think the cherry wood smoke is going to be quite as prominent as the peat will be.
So I may be totally off base here, but one of the things that I've always thought was that, the compounds that create the smoke tend to be heavier, more oily, and one of the purposes of the charring of the barrel is to allow for such things that are viewed as impurities to
Uh-oh, we lost
I think
audio.
we lost your mic there. The same thing that was happening when we did Virginia Distillery. I think you're back now.
Am I back?
Yep.
Yes.
You want to just try that comment again?
So I could be totally wrong, but I think that one of the reasons why the smoke influence always fades is because charcoal is used as a filter to sort of take out what are viewed as impurities. So as the whiskey sort of expands and contracts out of the barrel staves, those heavier compounds, the phenols and esters and whatnot that carry that smoke flavor cling to the charcoal and are left behind when the whiskey is decanted.
Yeah, I believe that. I think you're 100% right on that. The charcoal absolutely is there to, remove impurities. It's really not adding any flavor or color. It is, that's the toast underneath. That's the wood underneath that's providing all the sugars and the color. But yeah, the charcoal is just like your Brita filter at home. It's removing impurities over time.
Yeah, I think that's one of the greatest misconceptions that we're challenging these days when people say, "Oh, the char is what gives it its color." And what we've sort of learned from talking to people and sort of studying the category more is like, no, it's actually the toasting. The toasted wood gives that color, and the charcoal is more of the filter layer. It only kind of does one thing. It's the filtering.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm sorry, Phil, you were saying?
Oh, the single malt is absolutely lovely on the nose.
Yeah, what I like about it is that we've had hardwood smoked whiskeys before. At least on this show, we've had the Copper Fox, which had some cherry wood smoke in it. This does remind me of that, but what's cool is that there is still a character here which does feel similar to the other Liberty Pole, the Ryes. I can't comment much on the bourbon because the cream part of the bourbon cream hides the bourbon quite a lot, but definitely the rye for sure. There's something in common here, and so that sort of brings me back to that question about your sort of sweet mash process. So you're choosing flavor as far as all of your technical considerations. So the common wisdom is if you want more flavor, you do a pot still. And you distill it as few times as possible. So you're doing double distilled on the pot still, right? That's one stripping run, one spirit run, right?
Correct.
And you're also doing sweet mash, which if it doesn't necessarily generate more flavor, it gives you more control over the flavor of each batch. So
Fair point.
that's my like initial thought on sweet mash. We haven't talked about sweet mash here yet either. Feel free if you like to elaborate on your sweet mash process.
Yeah, I mean, I think most craft distillers, even though they may not promote that style as much as some do, I think most craft guys are sweet mash distilleries simply because, the whole process of sour mashing again requires, investments in additional tanks and so sweet mashing for us was just, it made sense. That's how, we learned to distill. We kind of were hobby distillers for years before we opened up the distillery. Sweet mash, you're right. It allows you to really control things. You have to basically ramp up your sanitation protocols, right? The whole reason behind sour mashing was to, kind of control that bacteria. Bacteria don't like acidic, solutions, and sour mash is acidic, and so, besides kind of giving you a consistency from batch to batch, it also helped give the yeast a head start by inhibiting bacterial growth. So we kind of have to do that through, great sanitation. I mean, you know, I like to tell people that distilling is, 90% janitorial work and, 10% fun. We spend most of our day, moving hoses and cleaning but it's very important. Because you can't let bacteria get a foothold in your tanks and your hoses.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, the flavor of this one is blowing me away, and it's also 133 proof. So
133 proof. One of my favorite. You had talked about, um, Doug, about flavor, and we do. We do everything. We make very deliberate decisions to, as to kind of the final flavor, and pot stills really allow us to pull those levers to really bring flavors over into the whiskey. And Alan Bishop, I'm sure you guys have heard of Alan. Alan, is a very big pot still evangelist. He was a Copper and King and Spirits of French Lick, and he's now at Homestead Distilling. But he did I think he posted it on his Instagram account. Just kind of the most amazing kind of, example of why we like pot stills. Because when you taste our whiskeys, we want you to taste the terroir. We want you to taste the grains. We want you to taste, the localness of what we're doing, and not necessarily, we don't want it to be all oak. We don't want that barrel to take over. We want to bring over those, we use great heritage grains. We work with great farmers. We want those grains to, kind of make it over. And Alan wrote one time about, imagine if you were a baker and you used the best vanilla beans and used the best cocoa, and you made this beautiful batter, and you baked it, you put it in the oven, and the people that were eating your cake were complaining because, they tasted those ingredients and they weren't tasting the aluminum pan that you cooked it in. And that's kind of a really similar analogy to kind of a pot still whiskey, and using great grains, and then, people saying, hey man, this is, even though it may not be necessarily a young whiskey, we still want you to taste those grains, and it doesn't necessarily indicate youth. It indicates a purpose, purposefulness on our part to get those, into the final distillate.
yeah, absolutely. I think the Lou Bryson book, Tasting Whiskey, there was a great chart in that book that I mean, and it's just a really simple line graph, non-scientific sort of just demonstration of how, you start with a ton of spirit flavor, and then you have no barrel flavor with new make, and then as time goes on, the spirit flavor goes down and the barrel flavor
Yep.
goes up. And there's a point in
Yep.
time, at some point, depending on your climate, your actual flavor, whatever, where they're going to cross over and it's going to be more cask than grain.
Right.
And then as a separate consideration, as a producer, you're looking for the point where it tastes balanced, right? Which
Right.
is not necessarily
Right.
the same point to every palate.
Correct.
And it's also not
100%.
necessarily the same point to every consumer as well. There's a very subjective thing there. And for some people, the older the whiskey, they're for some people, they may tend to like older whiskeys because they like it to have less spirit and more cask. For some people, like I think I'm one of these people. I mean, if anything, American single malt ages faster, right? But American single malt, just because of the climate, right? That's a broad generalization, is not necessarily true. But for the purposes of this conversation, I think it's fair to say American single malt tends to age faster than Scotch. So yes, we drink younger age statement whiskey, sometimes no age statement whiskey, and we enjoy it quite a lot. We don't think it's young and flawed and spirity. We enjoy that we can taste the grains. That's my soapbox on age.
There you go. Oh, yeah, I just got off mine too, so we have the same soap.
My soapbox on age is simply, it's ready when it's ready.
Right.
Yes.
You can't.
That's a very yeah. Nobody's ever accused me of being brief. That's a very succinct way of putting it.
Yeah. The whiskey always tells us when it's ready.
This is fantastic stuff.
I am loving this. Absolutely. I added a little water to it, and I got a great Dr. Pepper note, which is like, that's a complex thing because Dr. Pepper has a million flavors in it, but something about it just comes together as Dr. Pepper.
Yeah.
The way the cherry smoke presents on the nose is a very, very light, barbecue-y sort of smoke underneath all of this like wonderful, rich, barrel spice and nice grainy, like not bright, but like a nice dense, cakey grain note. Fantastic.
Thank you.
I may have to.
Yeah, we had a we had a 50% angel share on on these barrels, this barrel. So that really tends, when you have that much angel share, when you have that much loss and you have that much concentration of the remaining liquid in the barrel, you just get this. I mean, it's just a beautiful big whiskey. I just, it could be. It makes me sad that I don't have 100 more barrels of single malt in the rick house right now. But
I will also note that this does not drink like 133 proof. I have a handful of bottles in this proof neighborhood, and I would say that this drinks more akin to something that's about 115, 116 proof, which is amazing.
Yeah, I would have said
I think
120. But I mean, yeah,
yeah,
that is definitely this. Like, I have something that's 138, I think. That scares me. Like, I put that in a glass and I'm like, ooh, this is gonna hurt. This is close to that, and it's nowhere near as scary.
I feel like the pot still, especially the way we run our pot still, we do have a pretty viscous, oily whiskey, and I think that viscousness coats your palate to the point where the whiskey will not drink as to its proof. Your palate's being a little bit coated, allowing that higher proof to kind of go down a little easier.
Yeah, I love an oily whiskey for that and many other reasons, and this
Yeah,
definitely is one of
yeah,
those. I could just live with the nose on this one forever. This is one of those whiskeys I love. I actually put it in this glass just because American Single Malt. I only had 2 Glencairns clean left, so I had to use one of these. But I was like, hey, the American Single Malt should go in the stem glass to be a little bit fancier. And I really love these glasses in particular
me too.
when I have a whiskey that I want to nose more than I want to taste it, if that makes sense. This
Mhm.
was a perfect choice for this whiskey. I would sit with this for hours and just nose it.
Mhm.
I mean,
I mean, the taste is great too, don't get me
wrong.
wrong, but like the nose is worth, spending some time with too.
So to our audience, important note about this release: it will be available only at the distillery.
Correct.
Yep. 100
Saturday.
bottles ish.
Yes, yes. 100 bottles Saturday at noon at our distillery.
All right.
So
We're
I
also
have a friend
actually
in Pittsburgh, and I might send him to go buy a bottle.
we're doing a double release on Saturday. We're also releasing a rose and rye, and we're on a single malt show, so I won't talk too much about the rose and rye. But rosen is a kind of his heritage grain that used to be the kind of the workhorse of Pennsylvania rye. Uh, uh, that that grain kind of went into extinction after the Pennsylvania distillery shut down after Prohibition. It was revived from a few ounces from a seed bank by a local organization called the Seed Spark Foundation in conjunction with the local farmer, Bob McDonald. They planted and harvested and planted and harvested this seed until they had enough to start, supplying distilleries with rosin. And so we have a 4-year-old rosin rye that we're also going to release on Saturday alongside the single malt. And we have a few more bottles of the rosin. We have about 200 bottles of that one.
Very cool. By the way, feel free to plug any of your products you want. We're giving you a platform. We have our reasons for having you here, but
Yeah.
whatever you're excited about, that is good for us.
Well, I'm
So
excited, to be honest, that you guys, this is, we were a little bit nervous about this is our first single malt. Um, to have you guys give positive feedback. We all loved it here, but we're not, we're not huge single malt evangelist followers. So I'm very, pleased that you guys are enjoying this.
I know of at least a few people, based on their palates for single malt, not just me, that would really enjoy this. And for what it's worth, anybody who's had there's probably more than one of these, but there's a seal box Copper Fox finished in a port cask. I think the port cask notwithstanding, I think this would compare really well with that. They're very similar in concept with the cherry wood smoke, and I think this is if anything more pure. It doesn't have a finishing cask, if I understand you correctly.
You're
And
correct. Yep.
it's only the cherry wood smoke. It's no wood chips added to the aging or anything like that. So the Copper Fox is
No,
very
so
complex. This
yeah.
one is very straight ahead and complex in all of its simplicity, if that makes sense.
So I should give you guys a little bit of a kind of a history of how this, was aged. So back in 2017, when we distilled this, we were still using small format barrels for all of our products. So this distillate went into brand new charred 15-gallon barrels. So that was kind of a different approach for us. Single malts typically, are thought to go into used barrels, but we put these into brand new charred 15-gallon barrels. And after about 2.5 years, we started really getting nervous that they were going to get over oaked. So we dumped the original barrels and mingled them together and put them into a 30-gallon used rye barrel, and then it spent the remainder of the 5 years in that used rye barrel. So it did have a little bit of a couple barrel, but it wasn't a finished process in the sense that it wasn't a toasted or a wine finished barrel. We were just trying to give it a little bit more oak to work with. We didn't want it in a small barrel for the time that we thought it was going to need.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, given the age, I would say secondary maturation. Some people would say a finish, but just new oak finished in used oak. As
Right.
Germ on the Blind Sample Showdown, that's how he would grade this one. Um,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that makes sense. No problems here. We love used oak. Like that's not a knock in any way.
Yep.
It definitely explains how. Did you say 50% or 15% Angel's share?
50.
50,
Wow.
48.6%. I think we calculated it.
So how did it manage to, like, even with the transfer to another barrel, how did it manage to last 7.5 years?
Yeah, we did sample it a few times over the years, so that could account for some of that angel share.
Okay.
You know, the nice thing about
I wonder what you
being
would
able
call
to
that.
let this,
The gremlins share.
yeah, the nice thing about the fact that our focus is not single malt is that we were not in a rush to get this out. You know, it's not part of our core portfolio. So there was no urgency, no rush to kind of get this out the door. And so it was really fun to watch this over the last 3 years, knowing that, 3 years ago was the oldest whiskey we had in the Rick House. And, it was fun to be able to taste it and say, I think we can keep going on this. It's, it's getting better every time we sample it.
I feel I should just ask a clarifying question. 50% per year Angel share or 50% total?
Total.
Oh,
Total.
total. Okay,
Total.
now the math is
Total.
mathing. I got.
Yeah, total. Total.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also I was gonna say that rye finish, that rye, the second cask being a rye cask, maybe that explains the
Right.
similarity I'm detecting between the rye and the single malt. It's just a shade in
Yeah,
there. It's
that's
like 5%
no,
of the
that and that's
profiles. Yeah.
yeah, and that's why I wanted to mention that because you had commented, so you were
I'm putting the
pretty
dots together.
adept
It's
there.
taken me a minute today, but I'm putting it
Yeah.
together.
I
Yep.
have to see if my D&D party is willing to make a road trip on Saturday.
This is something special. I think I hope people don't listen to this too soon, so we have a chance to buy it first. But in all seriousness, I think this is worth going out to buy. So if anybody's in the Pittsburgh area, or in that area of Pennsylvania, I think this is worth a trip for sure.
Thank you.
I would say if you live within 3-4 hours of Washington County, Pennsylvania, you should make the drive.
Yeah, I think
Thank you.
this would be a good use of a Saturday for sure. And we've talked about buying things at the distillery, and we've talked about the fact that we bought these, but I don't know if we said, hey, by the way, everyone, you can go on the Liberty Pole Spirits website and buy at least 4 of the products. For me in Washington, it gave me a list of 4 products to choose from. So it was the
Right.
bourbon cream, the regular strength rye, the old Monongahela foolproof rye, and the peated rye. Those were the 4 products I got to choose from. I don't know if the list would be different for anybody else, but you can buy the rye online, the various different ryes.
Yeah, those are we decided to kind of focus our national shipping on our rye portfolio, so we don't have the bourbon on there. We just we got a PO from our partner to send a single barrel rye and we do a holiday spiced whiskey that will show up on that site here pretty soon.
Sorry,
Okay.
both Doug and I are buried in glasses.
Yeah, I had to go back to the rye for a second. I was also processing PO for a second. So for anybody who's not in the purchasing business, that means purchase order, not like PO box.
Correct.
Jargon alert. Not that we're light on jargon around here. We're just used to the jargon we generally use.
See, I worked in a warehouse for a while, so that's sort of where my brain goes. Beautiful stuff.
Yeah, the
Thank
rye
you
and
so
the single
much.
malt, beautiful in totally different ways.
Thank you so much.
I mean, I'll be honest. When I saw that you had an American, so you were already on my roadmap somehow. And I think it was the peated bourbon, peated rye that had my interest as a peated single malt lover. But I've heard only good things about Liberty Pole. So when I saw the label for your American single malt, I said, That's going to be good. We got to talk to him about it. So I'm really glad that you accepted doing this interview with us, because this has been a lot of fun.
Oh, heck yeah.
And really getting to talk to somebody whose bread and butter is something other than American single malt, making a truly exceptional American single malt that really deserves to be on people's radar. And I'm looking forward to your future releases too. I do hope there are more.
There are a few, so we need to
You
do more.
mentioned going forward. So while we're still on the single malt, before we move on to the peated rye, you mentioned going forward, you would not probably be producing the American single malt, or not the entire, like maybe not the wash or something like that. So I guess I wanted to ask, are you thinking about partnering with a brewery to do the wash and then distill that from there?
Yeah, and that's what we've done for the single malts that we still have, you know, in the rick house in barrels. Those are both collaborations with local breweries, where the brewery, you know, they will brew us kind of to our specs a beer mash, beer wort. Um, they won't, you know, they won't hop it. We don't want, you know, we don't want to hop single malt. So they will do the mash. They will do the cook. They will lauter it, and then transfer the wort to us, and we will ferment it and distill it, and you know, it's a single malt. But so because we don't have the ability to lauter, and you know, I don't know that we'll get a louder ton in anytime soon. Our single malt future will all be collaborative projects with local brewers. So if there's any local Pittsburgh brewer listening that wants to collaborate, you know, reach out. Would love to chat.
And
So
there's using the platform.
There you go.
if it is any consolation, America's first single malt whiskey was produced in collaboration with a brewer because they are, to quote Joseph O'Sullivan, a winery with a still and not a brewery with a still. So McCarthy's is made in partner currently with Double Mountain.
Yep.
Double Mountain does their fermentation and they do the distillation.
Yep. And before that, it
Yeah.
was Widmer Brothers. So they got started with Widmer Brothers. As far as I know, they've only had two brewery partners so far. I figured since we were talking about how they started, we should give mention to that. Yeah. And not only that, if I remember correctly, Stranahan's used to partner with a local brewery before they got to a certain size.
I mean, you
Why
are
am I-
in good company.
Why am I
It's
not
pretty
remembering
common.
anyone else off the top of my head?
It's pretty common.
Copperworks. Copperworks has partnered with breweries for almost all of their existence to do the wash for their single malt. That may not be, almost all is probably not necessarily true, and they may be transferring. They may be. I don't know. I need to go do my research again about Copperworks because they've changed production methods a few times.
There's a wonderful, like, dark, rich caramel note that I keep coming back to on the single malt.
For me, it's the Dr. Pepper. Like whenever I dig deeper, it's like I think there's a little bit of like cherry cordial to it, like that candy with the cherry inside, but it's like it's more like the black cherries and like the black cherry ice cream almost, if that makes sense. And that's me trying to break it down, but really it's just coming across as Dr. Pepper, and like not in a bad way. It's like imagine like a craft soda trying to reproduce the flavor of Dr. Pepper, but it's like in a really good way.
No, that the cherry kind of dominated our team tasting notes when we were tasting this, you know, as a distilling team. Cherry kept coming back, you know. I think there's a pretty prominent cherry note that comes out of this. But you know, Phil, you're right. I mean, there is an inherent sweetness that you know, I can see your caramel note. I think our house profile tends to be on the sweeter side.
What's funny about this versus the rye is that they're both sweet compared to the other, but in a different way, which is
Right.
interesting. I'm not quite sure what to make of that because normally I think, hey, this one tastes sweeter compared to the other one, so the other one should taste less sweet compared to the other one, but it's like a different kind of sweet. Yeah, I'm gonna spend some time doing tasting notes with this one. I don't want to dominate our broadcast today with dead air. Like there is more than the cherry in there, but it's hard to put tasting notes to it, and there's a complexity of spirit as well as cask in there.
Yeah.
Remains to be seen whether I think to my palate that's perfectly balanced or not. I'm not really going to comment on that, but I think they're both there and they're both working. I'm going to keep just a little bit of that to nose later. I'm ready to pour the peated rye if you are. Yeah. Okay.
So do you want me to give you a little color on the peated rye?
Please do.
We opened up one of our earliest core whiskeys was a peated bourbon. That was my wife was and still is a huge Scotch fan, huge Isla Scotch fan. So when I was hobby distilling, I was making bourbon and rye, and she was always, asking me, why can't you make a Scotch? And it's very difficult as a hobby distiller to get peated malt. I was buying my grains from a brewery supply store, and peat's not a big grain that peated malt is not a big grain for beer. A little goes a long way. So I was able to get a little bit, but not enough to make a whole batch. So I thought, well, let me just try to add a little peat to a bourbon mash, and it was actually fantastic. And so that was kind of the idea for our peated bourbon. There are a few of us out here, Kings County probably being the original peated bourbon distillery. They were making it before we were. But it's really a unique whiskey, and I think it's really what kind of gave us a little bit of name recognition because it was such a unique whiskey. We source peated malt from Scotland. We get it from a malt company that's located in Inverness. So it's a Highland peat, not an Isla peat. But the mash bill for both the peated rye and the peated bourbon is 60% of the base grain. So for bourbon, it's corn. For rye, it's rye. 30% heavily peated malt, and then 10% unpeated malt. So the mash bill for this peated rye is 60% rye, 30% peated malt, 10% regular malt. Double pot distilled, sweet mashed, aged in 53-gallon barrels. The peated rye is always a cask strength release. So this year's batch is I think 111.4 proof for this batch.
Yep, absolutely. I was just looking at the details on this label, how it's a little bit different from the other rye. So, for one thing, here I'll zoom in a little bit. So for one thing, we have a batch number 6 there, and we've got a handwritten bottle number of 1052. So not a huge batch, small batch. It even lists the barrel numbers and the barrel fill dates. So we've got full transparency on what's gone into here. Very cool.
Always.
The unfiltered, pot distilled, true small batch. Those are all words on the label. And a minimum of 3 years is written on the label here. So
right.
I believe the way the math worked out. Spring 2024. So that would be a true age statement of this one, not one with some extra room in it.
Right.
Cool. We love transparency. Love geeking out about transparency. I people are probably tired of hearing me read labels, but I love it. So So Phil had some great tasting notes on this one, and honestly, he got a completely different profile off of this one than I did. Um, so I'll let him speak to that when he's ready. What I got from this is um, yesterday. I think my palate was off yesterday, so I was not getting a lot of sweetness for some reason. Could have been dinner, could have been any other reason. So it's definitely got the sweetness. It's got like especially on the nose, it's got a nice rich earthy. Um, it doesn't scream smoke at me personally,
Right.
which is nice. I mean, I used to be like an Isla all the time. I only drink young Isla because I love how punchy smoky it is, especially on the nose. But I've come around to liking it a little bit softer, especially on the nose, because you can smell past the peat and get so much other complexity that's there. So I like that a lot. And then on the palate, for me, this is like, yes, rye, but it almost has the smoke profile of a mezcal, like that herbal, like cooked charred vegetable sort of note. So that's what I got from this, and I like that. To be clear, I love mezcal. Don't talk about it very much, but like when I buy agave spirits, it's almost always mezcal.
So we do the peated bourbon as well as the peated rye, and kind of when people taste them side by side, um, the peated bourbon tends to be a lot peatier, right? And my theory on that is that corn, the base grain in the peated bourbon, the 60% grain in the peated bourbon is a little bit submissive to the peat. I think the peat tends to dominate the corn, and so the peated bourbon tends to be a little bit more of a peat presence, which some people like, some people don't. Whereas the peated rye, even though it's the same mash bill, it's 60% rye instead of corn, but the rye is a much more formidable grain. And I think, you know, the rye and the peat, I mean, they kind of they go at it pretty evenly. And the my favorite thing about this peated rye, depending on my palate, depending on where I'm at in the day, what I've had to eat, um, sometimes I'll drink this peated rye and I'll get, where's the peat? I'm really getting a lot of rye here. This is a really beautiful, I love this rye. Other times the peat, kind of punches me. And I love that, that unpredictability of it based on kind of my palate for the day, what I'm going to get out of this whiskey. It's my favorite thing about it. With the peated bourbon, I know I'm going to get peat, which I love. But this peated rye, hey, it might be different tonight than it was last night.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that in just the couple of days that I've had it. So, I mean, I like that, right? I may have said this last week. If a spirit gives me everything it's gonna give me the first time I taste it, then I'm actually less likely to keep drinking it because it's like,
Right.
well, I mean, I'm a special case, right? Like, the number of bottles I have is an unrealistic thing. Nobody should have this many bottles. This is a thing that happens when you review whiskey and then start a podcast, and then you have reasons to keep buying new things. Don't do this. Don't do what I do. I mean, Phil, you do you. Your collection has always been awesome, but don't do what I did, where you buy a new bottle, you open it, and then your only hope of finishing it is by sharing it with people because it's a silly thing. But when a whiskey gives me something different every time, those are the ones I keep coming back to. Those are the ones that eventually I finish and I go, man, I wish I had more of that. Which is a ridiculous thing to think when you've got so many bottles of whiskey.
What I got differently tonight, which may be the influence of the other things that I've been drinking, and probably a weird note, cordite.
Okay, I'm trying to remember if I know what that tastes or smells like.
It is like if you've ever been around, like when they've done a demonstration where they're firing a cannon or something, and there's that like sort of slightly bitter, acrid, almost ashy, but also kind of like earthy and and woody smell. That's
Yeah.
what I'm getting.
Okay. I can see that.
This
I'm
is
gonna have to. I'll file that away. I'm gonna have to think about that. I don't have any strong memories of demonstrations of firearms.
So kind of I'm sorry, Phil.
go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna, we don't, rightly or wrongly, we don't really do a lot of spirit competitions. Um, we would much rather talk to, guys like you, content creators, reviewers. I think that's, that's kind of where, we try to get our spirit out there. And this peated rye, there's a podcast based in Denver, Colorado, called All Things Whiskey, and those guys named this peated rye as their whiskey of the year last year. Um, it beat a Glenmorangie Signet. They picked a bourbon, a Scotch, a rye, an Irish whiskey. So our peated rye was their rye whiskey, and then it took the whiskey of the year over some pretty formidable other entries. And Fred
Yeah.
Minnick a few years ago actually um, put this with glowing, kind of praise in his top 100 at number 50. He really liked this. So, it's a whiskey that has generated a lot of buzz. But like all of our peated offerings, it tends to be polarizing. Some, people either love peat or not so much. So
Yeah, I think we don't really do listicles too much here. We did one. We should probably do an end of year wrap up. Um, I think it's great to see, like, it doesn't have to be. We need to do. I need to sort out my thoughts on competitions. We were going to do a special where we had a panel of a spirits judging judges to talk about how the competitions really go and like what those awards should really mean to consumers. But I think there's a certain amount of doubt about a lot of those awards that get slapped on
so
bottles.
many. There's
There's
so
so
many
many.
awards.
And
Yeah.
how, as a consumer, do you know which ones had the most competition? Which ones had, I don't know, for lack of a better term, the best judges? Like, I don't know. That's a terrible. I feel like that's a terrible thing to say, but or the most extensive panel of judges, let's say, is probably a better way of putting it.
And what the criteria was. Because,
And
for
yeah,
example,
exactly.
I run a spirits competition, specifically whiskey, every summer, that is voted on by the public. I mean, everybody gets to vote for the Virginia whiskey producer that they think should move on to the next round of competition. And none of the distilleries that have won have put that in any of their marketing that they've won it because it doesn't mean anything. But I have had conversations with somebody where it's like, oh yeah, this distillery won the Virginia Whiskey Tournament in 2022, and oh, what does that mean?
Hmm.
And there are
Yeah,
a lot of competitions out there that are like that.
yeah. You're.
Yeah.
I think that reminds me. Didn't Caitlin Bartlemay tell us about the there was some brandy competition that that had like written them asking if they wanted to
Oh
enter, and it was like two guys in a college dorm or something like that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
forget how
I
that
can,
story worked
yeah,
out.
send me two bottles and $500, and I'll send you a medal back. But
Oh yeah, that's a racket.
yeah,
Why
it's
aren't we doing that? That's a way to fund the podcast.
there you go. In our case too, I think if we were a more national brand, and maybe now that we're shipping with Big Thirst, I think we would lean more into competitions, because I think our local support group, a medal's not going to mean anything to them because they know us, they've been to our distillery. I think where those medals come in handy is if I'm sitting on a shelf in Washington, state of Washington, and you've never heard of me, right? You've never heard of Liberty Pole, but I've got a, platinum San Francisco World Spirits Competition sticker on my bottle. That's going to get your attention. But,
Hmm.
we're not there yet. We're not national. We're not competing in markets where people don't know us. So, I think, spirit competitions definitely have a place. We're just not at that point in our trajectory where I think it kind of moves the needle for us.
That's fair.
Yeah, and considering it's not free to enter those things, it makes sense to
Oh gosh.
choose your battles.
Right, right.
I really,
I'm adding a
really
couple
like
drops
the
of
peat
water.
rye. So, one of my favorite bottles that I don't pour very much because I'm afraid that once it's gone, it'll be gone because I don't see anybody doing it ever again, is a rye whiskey that was finished in a Lafroig barrel. And this is a little bit reminiscent of it.
Yep.
Two of my favorite things in one glass. Can't go
Rye and
wrong,
peat.
right?
Yeah, I'm having a good time with this for sure. And there, okay, so here's a question about your peated rye. So obviously, you're getting your peated barley from Scotland, so you're using Scottish peat. There is
Right.
American peat.
There is.
Um, have you considered using American peat in your peated products?
We have not. We have not. We've kind of very at the surface kind of looked at the possibility of that, and we have not found, you know, any Pennsylvania peat sources. I know, I mentioned Alan Bishop earlier. I know he's dabbled in Indiana peat, and I know Westland out in your neck of the woods, Doug. They have access to Washington peat. You know, it, we would want a local peat source if possible. We would have to, we would have to find a maltster who would be willing or able to use peat as a fuel, for their kilning. So it seems like a pretty formidable project to do that, but I don't want to discount it that we'll never do it. I think it would be awesome. But that's just something we haven't had the chance to really get very deeply into.
So follow up to that, which is going to depend on whether you actually want to do peat smoking or whether you can do peat smoking, is as far as I know, nobody is peat smoking, nobody is peat malting rye. Rye can be malted. There's a few people doing that.
Sure. Oh yeah.
Among them, I don't think anyone is peating.
I never heard of it. Yeah.
Is that something that you might, in some world where peated rye becomes part of your profile, is that something that you would consider, peat malted rye?
Hell yeah. That sounds incredible, actually. And I had
I
never thought
certainly
of that.
think so. Now that I've said it, I really want it.
Yeah, right.
I've done that to myself a couple times.
Something
Yeah,
barrel
no,
collaborations.
old Portrero. Old Portrero is one of the, original craft whiskey brands out there, and that's 100% malted rye. But it's not a peat malted rye, but it's a malted rye.
But maybe making that one step less complex. Have you considered a malted rye product to fill out your portfolio?
So we actually there is a even in our Monongahela rye, that 74% rye that I talked about, a portion of that is malted rye. So it
Okay.
is a combination of malted and unmalted rye. Yeah, we love that malted rye component, that malty biscuitness that it adds to the palate.
Stuff like the majority malted rye is a wild experience. It is
Yes.
unlike, you know, you go in thinking it's going to taste like a hybrid of rye and malted barley, but it's actually just a completely different thing.
Totally. It's completely different. Yep.
I will say that the way that the peat and the rye, because they are. Have you lost my audio again?
Nope.
No,
We
just
hear you.
never mind.
Okay.
You're good.
The way that um, the peat and the rye are both such strong flavor profiles, the rich, earthiness and herbaceousness of your rye, I think dovetails very nicely with what the peat brings with its sort of medicinal and and like very different uh, in the context of rye whiskey flavors. And I think that it works really, really well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I love that combination too. I just think it was a match made in heaven. It's a great combination.
I banned that Twitch user.
Thank you.
Twitch spam. Sorry, I was distracted for a moment. We haven't had to
Oh,
ban anybody in a minute.
So, you've primarily been making uh, Monongahela style rye, some bourbons, and some corn whiskey. I have to ask where the corn whiskey sort of came from.
yeah, it came from kind of our ethos. And I talked briefly earlier that, we can't compete with the heritage distilleries on volume, price. But what we can do is we can use heritage grains. Um, we so our bourbon and our corn whiskey are made with Bloody Butcher corn, which is a heritage corn. It's a very low yield crop for the farmer. It's low starch, so it's low yield for us, but it's different. And the corn whiskey, much like the peated bourbon, came about because we wanted to produce a unique whiskey that you're not going to be able to get from a heritage distiller in Kentucky. Um, mellow corn is an example of a corn whiskey. But other than that, from the heritage guys, I can't really think. Hardin's Creek just came out with a corn whiskey, but corn whiskey is still a pretty unique whiskey on the market. Balcones does a great blue corn whiskey. So we just wanted to kind of get in the game with a product that was unique to us, that you couldn't go to the liquor store and find an aisle of corn whiskeys. That said, corn whiskey is also, it tends to be a little bit of a hard sell, especially here in Western Pennsylvania, where we have a lot of people that have connections with moonshiners and distillers, and a lot of people have had a really bad corn whiskey that their Uncle Billy distilled on the back deck with his moonshine still. And so there's a preconceived kind of bias, I think, from a lot of serious whiskey drinkers against corn whiskey. But a corn whiskey done well, it's a beautiful whiskey. It really is. It's sweet, it's light, it's simple. Um, and so that's why we do the corn whiskey. Again, it's just trying to differentiate ourselves as a craft producer making something that isn't really a common whiskey that you can find other places.
So I was laughing to myself when you said you wanted something that's unique and doesn't have a whole section in the liquor store. And the reason I'm laughing is because that's the exact problem that American single malt has been uh, plagued by. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
that
Where's it
that
go?
nobody knows where to put them, and there are so
Right,
many.
right.
Um, I mean, it didn't. They used to be a unique product. I wouldn't say they're not a unique product. There's so many more bourbons, but there's enough of them now. They really do need a section.
Well, well,
Um,
that's why it's so important, and why that single malt commission is pushing so hard to get TTB to formally classify American single malt, because we really, you do need a designation for that whiskey, and store owners need to be able to categorize all the different American single malts together, not with the bourbons, not with the ryes. They need their own section.
yep. Speaking of, in the description of every one of our videos, you can find a link to write the TTB to urge them to ratify the American Single Malt Whiskey rules. This has been
Oh,
on the books for more than 2 years now, 2 years and 3 months, if I'm not mistaken, and we're still waiting.
Public
And
comment period ended the eve of my birthday. So September 27th, 2020, 2022.
Yep.
wow.
So we've been waiting, hearing. I mean, the commission is hearing stuff, but nothing concrete, right? The public has heard nothing. We really, it's been 2 years, 2 months, however you want to count. It's time to get this thing ratified. American Single Malt, for better or worse. I mean, I don't think worse, right? American Single Malt exists as a category because people are making it. And they're all making it in accordance with this definition that has been approved, all with an asterisk. 99% plus are making it in accordance with that definition. It is a category, whether it's legislated or not, and we really just need it on the books for the sake of protecting that category. As it becomes more popular, there's a risk that other people
Yep.
are going to slap single malt on a label that isn't single malt.
Yep.
But
For example, something that is 80% malt, 20% rye.
right, which happens to be from a place with a P and an F in Texas. Yeah, we don't like to call people out negatively, but there are some problems, right? And it's only going to get worse. So please go right to the TTB. Encourage them to. This is a message to the audience, by the way, just in case that wasn't clear.
I knew what you were talking about.
Yeah. Please go right to the TTB. And we had this idea, Phil and I. Actually, it was mostly Phil's idea, that what you should do is you should go to a distillery that makes American single malt. You should buy a postcard from them, and you should mail that postcard to your legislator and tell them to please put some pressure on TTB to ratify this thing, because this is an important economic force in this community that representative represents. And they would have arguably, like, the more of those people, the more legislatures we get involved in singing the praises of this category and the economic importance of getting it legislated, the more likely that is to happen. It's more important now than ever because we are in that good old lame duck period between an outgoing president and an incoming new administration, and priorities will get shaken up. And once things settle, any sense of priority that there might have been on this thing it'll just be on a brand new list in an arbitrary slot. And my fingers are crossed that we're going to get this across the finish line before that happens. And the more people write in, the more likely that is to happen. So now more than ever, please go out of your way to write to the TTB, do the postcard thing, let them know this is important.
Cool. And while you are at the distillery buying the postcard to send, buy a couple of bottles, buy a t-shirt or a hat, coasters.
Yeah, right. Yeah. This is awesome because now I have an actual distillery branded coaster to put on my desk when I'm doing the podcast.
There you go.
And I don't have to worry about drips ruining the varnish on my table anymore. So
right.
Unfortunately, mine are downstairs on the nice furniture.
Now, I could have solved that problem for myself anytime I wanted. And I actually did have coasters on my desk for a bit, but I moved them when I cleaned up and tidied up. And now I have coasters that belong on my desk as opposed to coasters I borrowed from another room. So yeah. Oh, speaking of merch, I put our logo on a card so that I could start handing it out and telling people about the podcast. But this graphic, the reason that we have this graphic is, of course, because we did the barrel pick. And since we have the graphic, and here I'll just pop that. I'll pop that up. There's the sticker. The McCarthy's barrel pick that we did has the sticker on it. And since we have this graphic, what we've decided to do.
Very nice.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, if you don't already know about it, because we've been talking about it for 2 months, the McCarthy's Barrel 701 aged 6.71 years in a rum cask, that is still available for sale. Last I heard, based on everybody telling me what they've bought, there's 40-ish bottles left. What I've heard directly from Big Thirst is that there are fewer than they at some point told us 72 bottles left, and that was like 6 weeks ago. And I have heard of people buying many bottles since then. So my math on that is there's about 40 bottles left. So if you're still thinking about getting one, you should get one. I reviewed that one on the Whiskey Vault channel as the Whiskey Vault Dry Week Takeover Week. Whiskey Tube came on and did reviews of bottles that were important to them. So there's that video is out there too. And I also, full disclosure, I donated a bottle of that whiskey to Daniel at the Whiskey Vault. No strings attached, just as a thanks for him partnering with me on multiple occasions, including the Whiskey Vault takeover. I felt that it was only fair that I send him a donation for all of the years of entertainment that channel has given me. So there's that too. And on the note of that graphic, Phil and I are noodling over a merch store. And I have ordered Glencairns with this design on them. So you will be able to buy a Glencairn with that design if you like, once we figure out how to sell them. So just a matter of time. Keep your eyes out. And that's probably at least 5 minutes of self-promotion, and I cut myself off there. So I should have done that at the beginning of the video because we have no viewers left, but that's okay. Any closing thoughts? And as we sort of develop closing thoughts and questions, and if anybody's in the chat who has final questions that we haven't answered, please ask them now. What we've taken to doing is in our final in our sort of getting out of here runway of the show, the last 10 minutes or so, we combine everything that's in our glasses.
Oh.
Just do a little bit of a blend of and the fun thing about that is the thing we liked the most tends to be lowest in the glass, then it's actually less represented in the blend. It just weird things work out that way. So like me,
I had to move.
I have a drip
I had
of the
to
single
move to
malt.
plug my computer in, so I'm going to leave and I'm going to do the same thing. I'll be right back.
Okay, sounds great. So I've got about equal parts of the rye, the unpeated rye and the peated rye, and just a drop of the single malt.
I would like to take this opportunity to remind folks, we'll put a link to the Liberty Pole Spirits website in our description down below.
Yes, we did, and you should go check them out.
Absolutely buy some spirits from them. If you are in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, New York, Maryland, you should make the probably 3-ish hour drive to visit them on Saturday at noon, when they will be releasing their single malt and their rose and rye. You will not be disappointed by it.
Okay, I did a blend of rye, peated rye, and the Cherrywood single malt.
So I only had a couple drips of the single malt left, so I put it in the single malt glass to get as much of that in there as I could. Oh, by the way, one thing that I didn't point out earlier is that you can tell how oily this whiskey is, how fatty this whiskey is, because it wants to leave a cloudy residue on the glass where you've sipped it as it evaporates. And that's not a flaw to me. That's an awesome thing to see, because I love my oily whiskeys.
That is an interesting dram.
We rarely experience something better than the sum of its parts, but it's often at least interesting.
I will say the rye really pops through.
The unpeated rye, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know that there's much more to say about it than that. It's tastes like rye. It tastes like the peated rye, and it's got a little pop of cherry wood in there.
Yeah,
Gotta
I
say,
agree.
um, I think this sort of started because in an effort to clean up after a stream one time, I just sort of dumped everything into one glass because I had a little bits left. And the result was, I think I described it as being like pizza, in that there are a lot of different flavors in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't sure how much I enjoy all of them together, but they certainly create something.
There's a little bit of a charred pizza dough thing. I'm sure it's just because you said pizza, but like that way that like when you get those like the black spots on naan, that sort of like charred dough flavor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah,
I got a little
yeah.
bit of that. All right,
See, I think
no, go ahead.
I was a little heavy with the peated rye in my blend, so I'm that's kind of the dominant flavor that I'm getting out of this. But
Oh, I will point out that
delicious.
we sometimes make intentional decisions to not add the coffee with bourbon cream into our whiskey blend
Yes.
because technically that's something that's in a glass on my desk, but we're not
Yes.
going to do that.
Yeah.
That would completely disrupt the profile. I don't know. Maybe I'll try it later. Maybe it's actually better than I think. Okay, so one last question, I guess, just to ponder and discuss as we sort of make our way out and enjoy this glass. When you're not drinking your own products, what do you like to drink?
I absolutely my first whiskey love was Irish whiskey, and I'm still an Irish whiskey fan. I have a big, shelf of Irish whiskeys at home. Um, I'm a big Redbreast fan. I love Teeling. I love I love the Bushes. I love Black Bush, Red Bush. Yeah, I've just have a lot of Irish whiskeys, and my favorite and one that I'm really trying to make last for a while is the Redbreast 27-year-old, which comes
Ooh.
in a beautiful wooden case, and it's finished in port barrels, and
Is that the
it's
one with like
just
the frosted glass and the sort of maroon
yes,
label?
yeah, it's
Yeah,
like
that
a dark bottle frosted. It is absolutely phenomenal. But
I
yeah,
got to
so
try that one and I mean, this is always context based and it was during a whiskey tasting. But the flavor note I got off of that one was like poppadoms. You know, like at an Indian restaurant where they serve you that hard cracker that's made with chickpea flour and has a bunch of those little seeds in it.
ah.
Is that ringing a bell? That may just be
Well,
an experience unique to me.
it may be, yeah, because we kind of got more of like a strawberry cream, kind of
Hmm.
the lifesaver strawberry cream hard candy was kind of what I noticed when I sipped that bottle for the first time.
Okay. We'll have to ask the pawn what notes he got from that because I know he's had it. He's our he was in every stream with us for about a year, and
Okay.
that is some commitment. So the fact that and I don't mean on stream, but like in the chat, and the fact that um, we've experienced his attrition. I think I don't know what the flipping that around would be word wise, but we've experienced his attrition, and that seems fine to me because he did stick with us for a year, and we gave him one Irish whiskey episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're probably going to do more of that. I mean, we named the show Single Malt Frontier for a reason. We didn't want to lock ourselves into specifically whiskey or specifically American single malt whiskey or any other type, because there is cool craft whiskey coming out of Ireland and Scotland and everywhere
Oh,
else
heck
in the
yeah.
world. And it would be cool to include those on the show at some point when we feel like we've gotten enough American single malt whiskey to have boiled that particular ocean.
So I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Talnua. They're in Denver, and
Mm-hmm.
great people. And they do a very traditional, triple pot distilled Irish style whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
They follow the Irish whiskey files. That would be a great craft distiller to have on at some point. Good people, good whiskey. There you go. Yep, you have
There it
them.
is.
Yep, yep,
Turn it around so it's all
yep,
facing the front. Yeah, I'm a fan of
yep,
Talnua. Really good stuff.
yep, yep.
They don't make a single malt though, I think, but I think American Irish style single pot still is pretty close.
Yeah,
Philosophically.
they do it, they do kind of, the Irish were smart because, the government was taxing malted grains because that's what you need to make whiskey. So the Irish figured out they could use a combination of, malted barley and unmalted barley and save a lot of tax money. And I'm Irish, so, I appreciate that, that expertise that they had. And, so Talnua follows that recipe pretty closely.
That's awesome. Now I wonder how I would
Yeah.
answer this question, because what I do is usually I drink American single malt, and usually I'm either prepping for a show or I'm reviewing American single malt in some capacity. And every once in a while, maltrunners.com, the review collective website that I'm a part of, says, let's do a collective review of this Cavalan or something like this liquid. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Okay. I'll drink single malt from somewhere else in the world and do a review. Sure. But it was my birthday this week, and I gave myself an evening off where I did absolutely nothing that had anything to do with anything related to work or the podcast. And I said, what do I want to drink? And what I ended up drinking was I opened the Blue Spot for the first time.
Oh,
And I really enjoyed that. But in terms of what I reach for, if I'm going for like, I want something that's going to be excellent, that I already know is excellent, and it's not my typical super smoky thing, nothing particularly challenging, I go for liquid every time.
The last Irish whiskey I consumed was the Teeling small batch, finished in a ginger beer barrel.
ooh,
Okay.
Just trying to figure out where I had put it.
That's a different thing. So I just got the VDC gingerbread stout cask finished. I feel like ginger beer is a completely different thing. Let's put it that way.
I mean, it's got ginger in it.
Yeah. It's got ginger in the name. It does have ginger in it somewhere. Yeah.
I mean, ginger beer, yes.
No, I mean, I feel like gingerbread is less ginger. Gingerbread stout is so many steps removed from ginger, right? And then it's a finish.
Yeah.
So, but there's still ginger in the profile, and it's a little bit red hotsy, like it's a little bit cinnamon candy-ish. Yeah, I haven't gotten around to really doing tasting notes on that one, but I will. Anyway, I think we've pretty much used up all of the conversation topics. It's probably time to let Jim go. So I will just say thanks, Jim, for being here. Thank you for the benefit of your time, and also for giving us a special sneak preview of this release, which is super limited. So I know just how valuable this 2 ounces of whiskey is. And I really appreciate it getting to try this. And I'll tell everyone to go get everyone that I can. I'll tell to go get it. So
I appreciate the invite. I wish I could have sent more, but I'm just super pumped that you guys enjoyed it, and I enjoyed talking to you, and it just thanks for what you do. I mean, craft distilling is, it's a tough business, and to have, a kind of a community of supporters like you guys just means the world. And we appreciate everything you guys do, and all the other content creators out there that that give us a little bit of a voice that that we wouldn't have otherwise. So thank you so much.
Yep. And on that note, let me just say, rising tide lifts all boats and everything. We have some friend podcasts that we are fans of, that we interact with occasionally. So Embellish Pod has done an interview with Liberty Pole. If you want to hear more about Monongahela Rye, excuse me. And also Crafted Conversations. And by the way, Alan says hi.
Alan is the best. I love Alan.
So, I'm going to do a dumb segue, warning. So with all of these voices in the industry, and also thinking about the several voices that we've combined into the glass here, I would like to cheers to the chorus. Everybody's singing the same tune, and it's absolutely beautiful. So cheers to you, Jim, and to everyone else.
Cheers to you, Doug, Phil, everyone else.
Until next time, we'll see you in the lodge.
Cheers. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.